Hey guys, and today I will tell you the top 10 people with incredibly bad luck. 10. Apple co-founder passed up billions. It was Wayne who typed up the very first Apple contract, delineating each man's role in the company and their cut of the shares. Jobs, 45%, Wozniak, 45%, and Wayne, 10%. Wayne even created the first Apple logo, a woodcut-style depiction of Newton under the famed apple tree. But just 12 days later, Wayne called it quits. He knew he didn't quite fit in with the energetic boy geniuses and didn't see a place for himself, or his own ideas, in the future of the company. Plus, he was worried that he might have to use his personal assets to pay any debts they incurred. Unlike the other two, he had a house. So he sold back his shares for a total of $2,300, $800 immediately and the remaining $1,500 later. Sources: Martin, Wayne. Those shares, if Wayne had held onto them for the past 40-plus years, would now be worth close to $100 billion. That's a lot of lost zeros. Overall, Wayne says he doesn't regret his decision and would likely have quit long before reached its record-breaking $1 trillion valuation. But in a Facebook essay, he admitted that he probably should have stuck around at least until 1980 when Apple went public and Jobs and Wozniak became instant millionaires. And then there's more bad luck for Wayne concerning his original Apple contract. Wayne kept the document in a dusty file cabinet for decades until he finally sold it to a collector in the early 1990s for $500. That very same contract sold at auction in 2011 for $1.59 million. Sources: Martin. 9. Twice bombed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Of the roughly 283,000 Japanese survivors of the atomic blasts that obliterated the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, Tristan Yamaguchi was in rare company. Only about 10 unlucky souls were witnesses to both bombings, but Yamaguchi's was the unluckiest case on record. Source: Atomic Bomb Museum. In 1945, 29-year-old Yamaguchi worked as an engineer for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, and was in Hiroshima on August 6 for a business trip. Stepping off a tram, he was enveloped by a blinding white light. Little Goy, the first atomic weapon ever used in war, had detonated just 2 miles, 3 kilometers, away. Yamaguchi survived, but suffered serious burns across his torso and 2 ruptured eardrums. More than 80,000 men, women and children were killed by the blast. Eager to get home, Yamaguchi braved the peak radiation zone of downtown Hiroshima to catch a train the very next day to Nagasaki. On August 9, while in his office telling his boss about the horrors he witnessed in Hiroshima, the U.S. forces dropped Fat Man on Nagasaki. As the room filled with the same blinding white light, I thought the mushroom cloud had followed me from Hiroshima, Yamaguchi told the British publication The Independent in 2009. Yamaguchi kept quiet about his double bombing status until his 80s, when he wrote a memoir called Twice Bombed, Twice Survived, and became an advocate for denuclearization. It was my destiny that I experienced this twice and I am still alive to convey what happened, he said in an interview when he was 93 and in the final stages of cancer, probably caused by exposure to so much radiation from the 2 atomic bomb. Source: McNeil. 8. Only person hit by a meteorite on November 30, 1954, Alabama resident Ann Hodges became the first, and possibly only, person to ever be struck by a falling meteorite. The 8.5-pound, 3.8-kilogram, space rock burned across a clear blue sky before crashing through Hodges' roof, bouncing off a radio and striking her in the hip as she napped on the couch. According to astronomer and meteorite expert Michael Reynolds, the odds of a meteorite striking a populated area, let alone an individual person, are staggeringly remote. You have a better chance of getting hit by a tornado and a bolt of lightning and a hurricane all at the same time, Reynolds told National Geographic. Hodges' life didn't get much better after getting smacked by the interstellar traveler. Although she only suffered a nasty bruise from the incident, it thrust Hodges and her husband into the media spotlight. Overcome by the mob of people gathered outside her house, Hodges was transferred to a hospital to recover. Next came a nasty court battle with her landlord, who claimed the famous space rock was hers. Hodges eventually won the lawsuit, but never found a buyer for what she and her husband had hoped would be a valuable object. Instead, Hodges had a nervous breakdown, divorced her husband and died at age 52 in a nursing home. The meteorite remains on display in the Alabama Museum of Natural History. Source: Nobel. 7. Best Beatles drummer dumped. Just before fame, Pete Best has rightfully been dubbed the unluckiest man in music for being dropped as the drummer for the Beatles in 1962, mere weeks before Love Me Do rocketed the band to stardom. Best first met the Beatles in the late 1950s when they were still called the Quarrymen and played the opening night gig at a Liverpool cafe owned by Best's mum. At the time, the band consisted of a revolving cast of musicians, including several drummers. It wasn't until 1960 that the core group of John Lennon, Paul McCartney and George Harrison had coalesced into the Beatles and needed a drummer for a series of gigs in Hamburg, Germany. They asked Best, who had drummed for his own Liverpool band, the Blackjacks, to come along. The Beatles' time in Hamburg was transformational for the young rockers. They found their trademark blues-infused sound in amassed crowds of giddy fans. Best felt like he became close to the other boys while living in ramshackle apartments in Hamburg's red light district. But Best was in for a rude awakening when the band returned to England in 1962. Right before the Beatles were scheduled to record a few singles for record label EMI, the band's manager Brian Epstein called Best into his office and broke the bad news. He said, "Pete, I don't know how to tell you this. The boys want you out," those were the words, "and it's already been arranged," recalled Best in an interview with the Financial Review. Various reasons have been posited for the sacking, but most likely it was simply that the others bonded better with replacement Ringo Starr. Best took it hard, even attempting suicide in the 1960s, before coming to grips with his short-lived time as a Beatle. In 1968, while the Beatles were still riding high, he was working at a bread factory to support his family, later becoming a civil servant. But he eventually started his own band and finally received a fat royalty check from the Beatles anthology, released in 1995, which included early demos with Best behind the drums. But he never spoke to John, George or Paul after he was sacked. Source: Connolly. 6. Lost 5 homes in 5 hurricanes. Melanie Martinez is lucky to be alive. In 2012, Martinez, her husband and her elderly mother were trapped in their attic as the storm's surge from Hurricane Isaac flooded her home south of New Orleans. They desperately hammered and punched their way through the roof, where they were finally rescued along with their 5 cats and 3 dogs. Yet being alive is about the only thing lucky about Martinez, who has the unfortunate distinction of losing not 1, not 2, but 5 separate houses to 5 separate hurricanes. True, Martinez chose to rebuild her house 5 times in the same Louisiana floodplain, but what are the odds that Hurricanes Betsy, 1965, Juan, 1985, George, 1998, Katrina, 2005, and Isaac, 2012, would rip through each and every one of them? To add insult to injury, Martinez's last house was selected for a $20,000 makeover by the only reality show Hideous Houses, which installed a new kitchen, new appliances and a new sewing room just for Martinez. The transformation was made a few weeks before the arrival of Hurricane Isaac. Needless to say, it's all gone now. Source: Carol. When asked why she continued to live in that spot, Martinez told The Guardian in 2012, "I was born here. It's home, home, home. But we want to move somewhere that's hilly, you know. To a house on a hill." 5. 3 vacations, 3 terrorist attacks. Jason Cairns Lawrence and his partner Jenny need a new travel agent. The unlucky British couple booked a series of ill-fated international holidays in the 2000s that defies all probability. First was a sightseeing trip to New York City that found them in the Big Apple on September 11, 2001, when hijackers flew 2 planes into the World Trade Center towers, killing more than 2,700 people in the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil. A few years later, Jason and Jenny chose to vacation closer to home, booking a few nights in London in July 2005. Aimed their visit, 4 suicide bombers attacked the London Underground, killing 52 people and wounding more than 700. Looking for a getaway destination in 2008, the couple chose Mumbai, India. To their horror, terrorists struck yet again, opening fire on a luxury hotel and railway station in the country's largest city, killing 174 people. Source: Roy. 3 vacations. 3 of the decade's deadliest terrorist attacks. We can only assume poor Jason and Jenny are on a lifetime kill watch list. 4. He invented the telephone, didn't profit, don't air utter the name Alexander Graham Bell in Italy. There, school children have been taught for over a century that the rightful inventor of the telephone was in fact Antonio Meucci, an Italian inventor who filed a preliminary patent for his Telefono in the United States 5 years before Bell, but then tragically died before winning credit for his world-changing invention. And it's not just Italians and Italian Americans who believe Meucci had our case against Bell. The U.S. House of Representatives passed a resolution in 2002 recognizing Meucci's contributions to the invention of the telephone. As early as the 1830s, while living in Havana, Cuba, Meucci discovered that sound could be transmitted as electrical impulses through copper wire. In 1850, Mucci and his wife moved to New York City to further develop the technology. Arriving in the US, Mucci was plagued by a series of setbacks. His wife fell sick and became paralyzed. To stay in touch with her, he whipped a short-distance telephone device from his workshop in her bedroom, which he demonstrated publicly in 1860, but received no attention from the English-speaking press. Mucci was burned in a steamship accident and fell upon hard economic times. At one point, his wife sold all of his telephone prototypes for $6 to a second-hand shop, so he started from scratch. In 1871, without the funds to file a permanent patent on his invention, he paid $10 for a caveat, which is a notice of an impending patent. Sadly, he didn't even have the $10 to renew the caveat after 1874. Bell, who shared a lab with Mucci, filed his own patent in 1876 and then got a lucrative deal with Western Union. Feeling that Bell had stolen his ideas, Mucci sued him. The case was pending in the US Supreme Court when Mucci died in 1889. The case died with him, and Bell was considered the inventor of the telephone source. Count 3. Only villager who didn't buy wine and lottery ticket every Christmas. In the small Spanish farming town of Sodeta, the Homemakers Association, a group representing homeowners in the town, goes door to door selling lottery tickets as a fundraiser for community events. In Spain, the special Christmas lottery is called El Gordo, the fat one, because it delivers the single biggest payday of the year. It's also one of the world's oldest continuous lotteries, first held in 1812. In 2011, the jackpot was up to $950 million, the biggest ever. Even so, some residents of Sodeta were reluctant to spring for the $26 ticket, since Spain was in the depths of a crippling economic recession plus a prolonged drought. But since the money went for a good cause, each of the 70 families in town chipped in, buying at least a portion of a ticket. All except one man. Filmmaker Costa Smith Sodakis lived outside of town in an old bar he was renovating, and the Homemakers Association ladies didn't make it out that year. No big deal, right? Wrong. Defying the incredible odds, Sodeta hit the jackpot, and each of the village families walked away with prize money ranging from $130,000 on the lowest to several millions on the high end. Farmers drove into town on their tractors and there took to the streets with a bullhorn to congratulate the jubilant crowd. Mitsotakis, quickly got the world's unluckiest man, took it all in stride. He had moved to Sodeta 8 years earlier to be with his girlfriend. The romance didn't last, but Mitsotakis fell in love with the town and decided to stay. He was happy for the villagers, humble farming families struggling with heavy debts, and even happier to find the perfect subject for a new documentary. 2. Olympics hero who became a terror suspect was the 1996 Centennial Olympic Games in Atlanta, Georgia. Early on the morning of July 27th, as thousands gathered in Centennial Olympic Park for a concert, a security guard named Rich Jewell spotted a suspicious green backpack sitting alone on the ground. Moving quickly, Jewell and other officers ushered consequences away from the bag only seconds before violently exploded. A homemade pipe bomb propelled nails and screws into the crowd, killing one woman and wounding more than 100. Casualties would certainly have been higher if Jewell hadn't alerted authorities and begun to clear the area. Initially hailed as a hero, Jewell quickly found himself under investigation as a suspect in the bombing. A local newspaper, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, published a special edition the very next day naming Jewell as a focus of police attention, and national media followed suit. News vans parked outside Jewell's home and barraged him with questions. The local police and FBI conducted multiple investigations. It wasn't until October that Jewell's name was finally cleared. But the damage was already done. Even though the real Olympic bomber, Eric Rudolph, was ultimately caught and convicted, Jewell's name was forever marred by the false accusations of his involvement with domestic terror attack. He died at 44 years old from complications of diabetes in 2007. However, he did manage to win settlements from NBC and CNN and a 2006 commendation from Georgia Gett. Sonny Perdue for saving lives at the Olympics source. SAP 1. 7 brushes with death. People often call Frano Slack the luckiest man in the world to survive 7 separate brushes with death, but the 89-year-old former music teacher from Croatia sees things differently. I always think I was unlucky to have been in these accidents in the first place, but you can't tell people what they don't want to believe, Slack told The Telegraph in 2010. Slack's first death-defying escape came in 1962, when his train from Sarajevo to Dubrovnik jumped the tracks and flew into the Nisi River, drowning 17 fellow passengers. Slack himself suffered a broken arm and hypothermia. A year later, on his first and only airplane flight, the plane went down, killing 19. Incredibly, Slack was sucked out of the malfunctioning door and landed unharmed in a haystack sauce door. The hits just kept on coming. Slack was on a bus that skidded off the road into yet another icy river. 2 of his cars caught fire, one burning off his hair. He was hit by a bus in Zagreb. And in 1996, he swerved to avoid an oncoming truck and barreled off the road, leaping free at the last second as his car plunged 300 feet, 91 meters, off a cliff. The only truly lucky thing that happened to Slack was winning $1 million when he bought his first ever lottery ticket in 2005 to celebrate his 5th marriage. I guess all the earlier marriages were disasters too.